The microphone feedback screeched across the ballroom. Dad stepped forward in his tailored suit, his jaw set like granite. The band stopped mid-note. I remember thinking how strange it was that a sound could make time slow down. He cleared his throat and spoke clearly enough for the back tables to hear. My daughter has made a choice today that I cannot support. She has married beneath our family's standing, and for this, she is no longer welcome in this house. The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt Keen's hand find mine, steady and warm. My bouquet trembled. Cameras flashed. An aunt I'd known my whole life hissed something to her husband about shame and legacy. Security guards positioned themselves near Keen's family, though no one had done anything wrong except exist. I stood there in my white dress, feeling it transform into a scarlet letter with each passing second. I swallowed hard, looked straight into the humiliation, and said the only true thing I could think of. My name is Annabelle Jessie, and this is the day my family cut me off. The silence that followed was absolute. They herded us through the service corridor like we were contraband. The waitstaff avoided our eyes. No one moved to help us with our things. Outside, the driver handed back the keys to the car I'd thought was a gift. My mother found me on the steps, pressed an envelope into my hand, and whispered, "You can still fix this. Call when you're ready." Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steel. Inside the envelope was a single bus ticket and a handwritten note. I read it once, then tore it in half and let the pieces fall. Keen wrapped his arm around me and we walked to the taxi rank with our luggage. The cab driver asked where we were headed. I didn't have an answer. We ended up at a modest hotel near the station, and that's when reality crashed in. My credit card declined. The second one declined. The third one declined. The hotel clerk's expression shifted from polite to pitying. Keen stepped forward and paid cash for one night with money from his wallet. We stood in that tiny room as darkness fell, and I finally let myself cry. We found a shortlet above a bakery in a neighborhood my parents would never visit. The flat was narrow and worn, but it was ours. Flour dust drifted through the window at dawn, coating everything in a fine, sweet powder. The bathroom was barely large enough to turn around in. I cried there in the mornings so Keen wouldn't hear, running the water to mask the sound. Then I would step out, wash my face, and say we'd be fine. We would be fine. We had to be fine. On the third day, I noticed a flyer taped to the building's notice board. It was handwritten and sad-looking, asking for help with cleaning and care for an elderly resident in the flat upstairs. The pay was minimal, but it was something. I climbed the narrow staircase, my heart pounding. When I knocked on the door, the smell hit me first. Ammonia and decay and the particular staleness of loneliness. I stood in that doorway and made a choice that would change everything. Ms. Bissy sat in a recliner wearing a soiled robe, her eyes bright with shame and need. She was elegant, I could tell, beneath the neglect. Her son lived abroad and called every other week. No one came. I started cleaning, really cleaning, opening windows and stripping sheets. I drew a bath and helped her into it, washing her hair with care, speaking quietly about nothing important. I cooked a simple chicken soup and sat with her until she fell asleep. When her son returned from abroad 2 weeks later, he stood in the doorway with his hand over his mouth. He cried. He thanked me repeatedly and insisted on paying double what we'd agreed. More than that, he called 2 of his friends who were struggling with similar situations for their aging parents. He said, "I need someone exactly like you. Can you help?" Within a week, 3 referrals came through. I tracked them all in a notebook, managing rotas and schedules with my phone and pen. Keen watched me scribbling and coordinating late one night. He'd been building something on his laptop during his shifts at the clinic where he worked data entry. He showed me what he'd created, a simple staffing and compliance dashboard that tracked clients, caregivers, schedules, and medical notes. It was elegant and intuitive. He said, "This needs a system. This is bigger than a notebook." I picked the brand that night, sitting on our kitchen counter. Kindred. It felt like honesty and commitment in something that could survive. I posted our first flyer online, just a simple design with our name and a phone number. Within an hour, a call came through. The number looked familiar. I almost didn't answer. It was my mother. Her voice was careful and measured. She asked how I was coping and slipped in a soft knife, calling Keen a phase and me impulsive. I breathed slowly, refused to defend him, and said I had to go. The next day, 3 of our new clients canceled without explanation. A cousin texted me a screenshot from the family group chat calling me unstable. The blacklist was subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. A vendor we'd been buying supplies from suddenly couldn't process our orders. A distributor I'd been working with said quietly, "Your dad came by. He said you won't pay. We can't take the risk." The words felt like a slap. Heat rose in my face and throat. I wanted to scream that I was good for the money, that I was building something real. Instead, I went home and told Keen. He didn't panic. He reconfigured our supply chain, prepaying small quantities through multiple independent suppliers we found in different parts of the city. It took longer and cost more, but it worked. A pastor called one afternoon asking if we could meet. He said my mother had asked him to pray me out of this situation. I declined politely. The obstacles kept coming, small ones, designed to wear us down. A licensing board email arrived saying our approval was deferred pending further review. No explanation given. I felt the weight of invisible hands pushing against us. We rented a church hall on weekends and trained 5 caregivers from scratch. I wrote our standards on a whiteboard with a marker: presence, dignity, reliability, documentation. Keen taught them how to use the app. We role-played difficult situations and practiced kindness the way you'd practice a language. The team nailed their first week of real work. A retired teacher we were caring for sent a handwritten note thanking us and saying she felt human again. I framed it. That same week, the licensing board sent another email. My approval was still deferred, pending further review. The phrasing was identical. I went down to the office in person and met with the gatekeeper, a man in his 60s who smirked when he saw me. He called me Missy and dropped my file onto the bottom of a stack of papers. As he did, I noticed his desktop screensaver, a golf course photo with my father laughing, arm around the man's shoulders. I felt sick and clear all at once. I filed a formal complaint that afternoon with timestamps and digital receipts documenting each delay. 2 inspectors arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning. I'd been half expecting them, a retaliation of some kind. Instead, I walked them through everything. I showed them our documentation, the app, the rotas, the care logs, the client testimonials. They raised their eyebrows and asked questions that seemed genuinely curious. One of them pulled me aside and said, "This is really professional. Would you be willing to pilot your onboarding tool with clinic volunteers?" They left with raised eyebrows and what felt like respect. That night, Keen didn't come home on time. I paced the flat until 2 in the morning, imagining accidents and catastrophes. When he finally walked in, he was exhausted but carrying a box of printed flyers. He'd met a retired clinic administrator at a community event who wanted to trial Kindred's system for coordinating their volunteer network. She'd given him her contact details and promised to call our office. The next morning, our largest client, the one who'd been with us since the beginning, fired us by email. Accusation was theft. A caregiver had allegedly taken a pendant from a client's bedroom. I raced over, mortified, already composing apologies in my head. The daughter pulled me aside in the kitchen. She spoke quietly. "Your aunt came by yesterday. She said you lot of trouble, said we should use someone more established." My stomach dropped. The daughter added, "I didn't know you had family like that. Anyway, we found the pendant. It was under a cushion the whole time." The accusation was withdrawn. She added almost casually, "Someone offered to replace your service for free. They said they had a foundation that helps with exactly this." I felt the walls closing in. This was a coordinated effort. They were trying to box us out through charity optics, through people we couldn't fight. I went home and called a lawyer I couldn't afford just to ask what to do. She gave me an hour of free consultation. She said, "Go public. Transparency is your strength." I published a Kindred pledge that night. Transparent pricing, clear standards, a hardship fund we'd create as we grew, so no one was turned away because of money. I explained our mission without naming anyone or anything specific. I just spoke about what we believed. The post went modestly viral, shared by clients and their families. Comments poured in from people dealing with similar situations. Within days, 2 clinics that had seen our pilot asked about broader adoption. We survived on small wins that month, meeting payroll by hours. I kept a journal of every slight, not to stew in it, but to remember why we were building. Every obstacle they'd thrown made me more certain. A retired teachers association signed a collective care plan with Kindred. The contract was small, but it was stable. That same week, a message arrived from an investor group offering friendly capital. They wanted to accelerate growth and scale. I agreed to meet them. In the pitch room, they showered compliments and asked elaborate questions about our model. They seemed genuinely impressed. Then they began discussing controlling rights and board seats and how quickly we could expand. They walked through it like it was already decided. I noticed their portfolio list on the wall. Familiar surnames dotted it, members of my parents' circle, people who ran the institutions of my former life. I smiled and thanked them. I closed my folder and said no. We'd grow patiently on our own terms. One of them laughed like I'd made a joke. I didn't clarify. I stood and shook their hands and left. That same afternoon, the licensing approval finally landed, effective immediately. No explanation for the sudden change. I framed the certificate and hung it next to the teacher's thank you note. We bought proper uniforms for our team. When we distributed them, our caregivers cried. We set up a small office above the bakery. I taped the license on the wall and took a photo of Keen standing beside it. Referrals jumped as our documented standards circulated through the community. Clients recommended us to their families. Staff were turning professional. I was 28 years old and we were building something that worked. A tabloid blog published a piece calling me a grifter preying on the elderly. It was vicious and completely false. The blogger claimed we were charging exorbitant rates and providing minimal care. He included no sources and quoted concerned parties. I felt the familiar burn of being targeted. I called the blogger. He answered on the first ring, confident. I asked who'd sent him. He laughed and said, "People who care about you." He hinted at a payoff if I'd consider other ventures. I sent him a legal letter that afternoon, then posted our audit pass letter and client testimonials online. His piece lost momentum quickly. No one picked it up. Ms. Bissy fell ill that week, and we coordinated her hospital transfer, making sure she was comfortable and documented every detail. I sat in the hospital waiting area holding Ms. Bissy's hand while she slept. Her son arrived and sat beside me. He whispered, "Don't let them dim you." He introduced me to a trustee who oversaw several aging estates and needed a modern care operator to advise on a new facility, a flagship retirement home they wanted to build. He asked if I'd be interested in designing and branding it, working on standards and systems. They wanted my input on everything from architecture to care protocols. I said yes immediately. The project's backers wanted to stay anonymous, the trustee explained. They believed in the vision but preferred discretion. Over the next 6 months, I drafted the blueprint with an architect. Air and light and documentation and family dignity at every turn. It was everything Kindred stood for, built into brick and glass. The trustee signed off and we broke ground. Then in a planning meeting, I saw a surname on the minutes that froze me. I recognized it immediately. The backers included my parents' inner circle. I kept my distance and my face straight through every meeting. The trustee didn't know I was related to any of them. It would have complicated everything. I maintained my professional boundaries and focused on the work. The facility neared completion exactly as we'd specified. An operations lead was hired, a woman with spine and vision, someone I could trust instantly. She asked me one afternoon, "Want to be there on opening day? I think you should be. This was your dream." I said yes. Opening day arrived clear and bright. The facility was polished, clean, the signage minimal and elegant. The Kindred logo sat on the gate, simple, quiet, honest. Staff moved with purpose and kindness. Gardens were planted with lavender and roses. Then the black car arrived. My parents stepped out, drawn and smaller than I remembered them. They stood under my logo, recognition spreading across their faces like a slow burn. Dad's eyes met mine through the glass doors. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Inside, I greeted them like any other family. "Welcome to Kindred." I walked them through intake personally. Diet, medications, preferences, advance directives, all the practical things that mattered. My mother tried to apologize without naming anything specific, her words circling and vague. I set clear boundaries. Equal care, no special treatment, no back office requests. Everyone was admitted the same way. Everyone received the same standards of dignity. The operations lead showed them to their apartment, spacious and quiet, with windows overlooking the garden. That night, my father asked to speak to me privately. We sat in a quiet office off the main corridor. He asked if we could reconsider the past, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I opened my journal, the one where I'd documented every obstacle, every slight, every moment of kindness that had helped us instead. Every date was there. I walked him through it, not with cruelty but with steady clarity. I closed the journal and said, We don't rewrite, we recognize. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was an old trust document, one from years ago that had once had my name on it. The trust was empty now. Their empire had cracked after a partner's fraud. The friends had stopped calling. My father's hands shook as he explained. Their finances were depleted. The legacy they'd tried to protect by cutting me off was gone anyway. I felt no triumph, only a strange, heavy sadness. I didn't gloat. I signed their standard admission and scheduled their first garden walk for the following morning. My mother waited in the corridor. She was smaller too, I realized. She whispered, "Are you happy, Annabelle?" I didn't answer immediately. We walked past the lavender beds under clear morning light. Residents laughed by the pergola. Staff greeted them by name, genuinely, not because I'd instructed it. I handed the keys to the operations lead and stepped back into my lane, the one I'd chosen. I turned to my mother and answered simply, "Yes, I am." Over the following weeks, I watched my parents settle into kindred like anyone else would. They received the same meals, the same attention, the same care protocols. No special treatment, no back channels. My father attended a cognitive engagement class. My mother joined a watercolor group. They made friends with other residents. I saw them laugh, genuinely laugh, in ways I hadn't witnessed in years. I continued my work, building the systems that allowed kindred to scale thoughtfully. I refused 3 more investment offers. Keen and I had expanded to serve 12 clients privately and consulted with 4 care facilities. We were careful about growth. We valued quality over speed. One afternoon, I ran into my father in the garden. He was sitting on a bench, reading. He looked up and didn't try to explain or apologize again. He just said, "You did this, all of this, I can see that now." I sat beside him briefly and said, "I had help." And I had something to prove. He nodded. That was enough. My mother approached me differently. She asked questions about the business, about Keen, about my life now. She didn't try to rewrite history. She just seemed to be genuinely curious about who I'd become. I answered her questions honestly but kept appropriate boundaries. We weren't suddenly a close family, but we were no longer enemies. One evening, I received a call from a solicitor. My parents had updated their will. They were leaving their remaining assets to the Kindred Foundation, a charitable entity I'd started to fund hardship cases. They weren't leaving anything to me directly. Instead, they were investing in the work. I cried that night, but not from sadness. Keen held me and didn't ask questions. He knew. The following year, Kindred opened a second location, then a third. We hired a team of specialists to develop our training protocols. Universities began reaching out, asking if we'd consult on gerontology programs. I was 32 years old. A journalist contacted me asking to interview me for a feature about social enterprises and family business. I almost declined. Then I thought about why, because I was afraid of reopening old wounds, of airing family conflict. Instead, I said yes. The article ran in a major publication. It told the story of how I'd built something meaningful after being cut off by my family. It didn't shame my parents. It just told the truth. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people who'd been rejected for choosing differently, from people building alternative paths, from people who needed permission to believe they could still succeed. The publicity helped Kindred immensely. We received offers to expand internationally. Keen and I discussed it carefully. We were careful people now, thoughtful about our choices. We decided to build slowly, to maintain quality, to stay true to what we'd started. My parents remained at Kindred as other residents cycled through. Some recovered and went home. Some passed away peacefully with their families nearby, cared for with dignity. My father volunteered in the garden. My mother helped with the library. They had purpose. They had community. One afternoon, my father asked if I could sit with him. He told me something I'd never heard before. He said his own father had pushed him toward a certain path, a certain kind of success, and that he'd spent his life trying to protect me from feeling directionless the way he had. He'd confused control with care. He'd thought cutting me off would force me to succeed on his terms. Instead, it had freed me to succeed on mine. I listened without interrupting. I didn't absolve him, but I acknowledged what he was saying. Some conversations don't need resolution. They just need to be heard. On the 10th anniversary of my wedding day, I stood with Keen in the Kindred Gardens. We'd been married 10 years. We'd built a home, a business, a life. We'd weathered obstacles and family conflict and the particular loneliness of being cut off. Keen had been steady through all of it, not trying to fix me, just walking beside me. We renewed our vows informally that day, in the garden with our staff and some of our long-term clients gathered around. My parents were there too. My mother cried. My father stood quietly, witnessing. After I walked to the gate where our logo hung, the same simple, honest mark I'd chosen years ago when I was desperate and determined. I traced it with my finger. People asked me all the time if I'd forgiven my family. I'd stopped trying to answer that question. Forgiveness felt too clean, too final. Instead, I'd built something good despite them. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. Kindred grew to 5 locations. We trained hundreds of caregivers. We consulted with governments on aged care policy. The work was meaningful and steady. I was 35 now, and I'd stopped keeping score of obstacles. That was important, not needing to prove anything anymore, just doing the work because it mattered. My mother asked one day if I had regrets about marrying Keen. I said, "None. Do you?" She looked at me seriously and said, "About how we handled it, yes. About you choosing him, no. He's good, you're happy, that's what matters." It was the first time she'd ever said anything like that. We sat in companionable silence. My father had developed early memory issues, nothing severe yet, but noticeable. He was cared for at Kindred with the same standards applied to every resident. He joked that he was getting the full experience, testing his own systems. He was aging gracefully, which I think he appreciated, being seen as a person, not a problem. Keen proposed a new idea one evening. What if we developed a fellowship program for young people interested in care work? What if we created pathways for people who didn't have traditional backgrounds? What if we built what we'd wished existed for us? I loved the idea immediately. We launched the Kindred Fellowship with a modest cohort of 5 people. Each came from different circumstances, different struggles, different motivations. We paid them, trained them, mentored them. Some would stay in care. Some would take what they learned and build other things. All of them mattered. On the first day of the program, a young woman raised her hand and asked, "Do people from any background belong here?" I said yes, absolutely yes. I thought of my wedding day, of being told I belonged nowhere. Now I was building spaces where everyone belonged. The power of that shift was immense. My mother had a fall in her apartment. Nothing serious, but it required observation and care coordination. I was there within an hour, overseeing everything personally. As I helped her into bed, she held my hand and said, "I'm proud of you. I want to say that clearly, without conditions or apologies attached. I'm proud of who you've become." I felt something release in my chest. I said, "Thank you." Not a grudging acceptance, but a genuine thank you for the words. My father sat in the chair beside her bed, and I could see him processing what she'd said, wishing perhaps he'd said it first. I put my hand on his shoulder. He squeezed it gently. That was how we communicated now, in touches and small gestures, the language of people who'd learned to be careful with words. I walked through the Kindred Gardens on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The lavender was in full bloom. Residents sat on benches, some reading, some in conversation, some simply existing in the quiet. My mother was there, helping a newer resident with the names of flowers. My father was in the library, organizing books with a volunteer's focus. The staff moved with purpose and kindness. The systems worked. The standards held. I thought about the day my father tapped that microphone and told the world I was no longer his daughter. I thought about the flat above the bakery and the fear and the determination. I thought about Keen's steady hand and the journal I'd kept. I thought about Ms. Bissy and the teachers and the investors I'd turned down. I thought about the logo on the gate. Simple, quiet, honest. The revenge, if you could call it that, wasn't in their humiliation or their dependence on the systems I'd built. It was in the life I'd constructed. It was in the meaning I'd made. It was in waking up each morning and doing work that mattered with a person I loved in spaces I'd designed for dignity. The microphone had been 10 years ago. This garden was now. I chose the garden.